champions at these different weight classes. Now you have 10 fighters in the top 10. And now, out of all 10 fighters, you may have 6 or 7 guys that's champion. And the reason why is because they said, well, why is there so many champions? Well, let me tell you guys what goes on in the sport of boxing that they're not telling you. Every time a fighter fights, he pays a sanctioning fee. A champion fight, he pays a sanctioning fee. So if a fighter has 4 belts, he pays 4 sanctioning fees. So if a sanctioning body, far as if they got 3 champions or 4 champions, they get money from all 4 of those champions when they should only be collecting money from 1 champion. It's not a such thing as an interim champion. You got guys walking around carrying belts and people think they're champions and they're not really champions.
Everything TBE Floyd Mayweather said right there, he's absolutely correct. However, ironically, all of that directly applies to Gervonta Tank Davis since he's currently not a champion in boxing today, in any division. At the moment in time, Gervonta Davis is the WBA regular champion in the lightweight division, which that's an interim title. In other words, he's Devin Haney mandatory, at least supposed to be. And like Floyd Mayweather pointed out, the reason why the sanctioning bodies do that is so they can make money. It's a money scheme in the sport of boxing. So while fighters like Gervonta Davis thinking they making history, in all reality, they only making the WBA money. So before I get into Devin Haney's response to Floyd Mayweather, let me first emphasize on this for a little bit. Only in the sport of boxing, where they promote fighters by lying to the public. What do I mean by that? HBO for years promoted Manny Pacquiao as an 8-division world champion when he's a 7-division world champion, which that's equivalent to the NBA if they lied by claiming that LeBron James won 5 championships, that he has 5 rings when he only has 4. Can you imagine if the NBA falsely promoted Kobe as having 6 rings when he only has 5? It would be worldwide news. But in boxing, it's the contrary. Old media have been lying promoting Pacquiao as an 8-division world champion. And no one knows that Pacquiao is only a 7-division world champion. No one talks about it. It's almost like falsely promoting these fighters on the hope list is the norm in the sport of boxing. For example, ESPN was promoting Vasyl Lomachenko as undefeated on multiple occasions after he had already lost. ESPN was also promoting Teofimo Lopez and Kambosos as undisputed when they were the most disputed champions of all time, since none of them held the WBC title, the WBC world title, the one that Muhammad Ali, Floyd, Sugar Ray Leonard, and Roy Jones held, the one that Errol Spence and Charlo hold today. It's none of that NBF witness protection franchise, safe face for ducking belt, which makes the ESPN undisputed list as real as Lomachenko undefeated record they had on their program, since during the entire time ESPN was doing all of that false promotion. Devin Haney was the longest reigning lightweight champion of the world. ESPN did all of that in order to discredit Devin Haney and protect Lomachenko, Teofimo Lopez, and Kambosos from Devin Haney. But ironically, Devin Haney ended up making history, becoming the first undisputed champion in the 4 belts era in the lightweight division, and the last since the all-time great Pernell Whitaker. It's amazing how Allah plan works, overshadowing old media plan. Now we know exactly why all of these fighters from Lomachenko, Teofimo Lopez, Kambosos, and Ryan Garcia ducked Devin Haney. It's as clear as day now. It's because they didn't want to get schooled by the undisputed dream, Devin Haney. But back to the point, because I'm getting away from it. The point is, boxing have always been the wild, wild west of all of the sports. There's no structure, there's no rules, there's no governing body. In fact, the WBA still have a racist judge judging fights to this day in Gloria Martinez. That's right. The WBA brought her back from the suspension instead of firing her completely, which I already made a separate video on that. I'm gonna leave the link for that video in the comment section below. So boxing have always been the wild, wild west. So ESPN didn't necessarily start the corruption. They only continued the tradition in the sport of boxing and celebrated it more against these fighters on the coincidental list. In fact, they took it to a whole nother level. See, the corruption tradition in the sport of boxing goes back all the way to Jack Johnson, to HBO, to now ESPN and DAZN. It went from Larry Merchant to Jim Lampley to Max Kellerman to now Mark Kriegel, Tessitore, Chris Mannix, Grisham, Mike Coppinger, AK and Barack, etc., etc., etc. Now they continue on the racial corruption culture. See, false promoting and not being honest in the sport of boxing didn't start necessarily with ESPN. In fact, it started all the way back in HBO, before Floyd Mayweather left HBO and completely let the ship sink. That's when HBO thought the fighters on the hope list was gonna save boxing, so they signed Gennady Golovkin and Canelo in order to save the ship. However, they made the ship sink more by completely ducking everyone. We talking about two of the greatest hype jobs in the sport of boxing. And looking back at their careers today, compared to how old media hyped them up, where Eddie Hearn this year alone, he said that Canelo can go down as the greatest of all time.
The greatest fighter of all time. Mike Coppinger said to me yesterday, you know, what does Canelo have to do to be recognised as the greatest Mexican fighter or one of the greatest pound-for-pound fighters of all time? And the answer is retire, because that's the only way you get the recognition. Look at the resume of him, you know, particularly over these last 10 fights. It's incredible. He's 31 years old. What we are witnessing here is probably the greatest fighter of all time before ours. And I'm going to sit in that seat on Saturday and I'm going to say thank you so much.
Shortly after Canelo in his prime loses every single minute to Bivol, he gets exposed in a terrible way, then turns down the rematch. Well, there is nothing great. You are not chasing legacy when you turn down a rematch at 168. Bivol was willing to go down to 168, and Canelo still turned it down. There's nothing great about that. To make matters worse, chasing legacy is taking the rematch right away, not turning it down to fight a 40 years old Gennady Golovkin. That's why it's more than fair to say that both Gennady Golovkin and Canelo Alvarez will go down in history as two of the most overrated fighters of all time in the sport of boxing. In fact, Jim Lampley, after Canelo tested positive for steroids, he said that if Gennady Golovkin doesn't beat Canelo Alvarez in the rematch, then his career is a failure. Remember, this is coming from Gennady Golovkin biggest fan. This is coming from Gennady Golovkin biggest supporter in Jim Lampley. More importantly, back on HBO, they were also false promoting, just like ESPN. I know you guys heard HBO promote Manny Pacquiao as an 8-division world champion for like 1,000,000 times. Well, I hate to give you guys bad news, but Manny Pacquiao was not an 8-division world champion. That's the farthest thing from the truth. The facts are, Manny Pacquiao is a 7-division world champion, which is still great, but he's not an 8-division world champion because at 140 pounds, he did not win a world title. He only beat Ricky Hatton for the IBO title. And we know the IBO title don't count because it's not one of the main 4 sectioning bodies. And that's the IBF, the WBA, the WBO, and the WBC. And we sure do not need more sectioning bodies in the sport of boxing. As Floyd Mayweather said, there are too many belts in the sport of boxing, and we do not need to add more by adding more sectioning bodies. And even if we do end up adding the IBO as one of the main sectioning bodies, Manny Pacquiao will still go down in history as a 7-division world champion, not 8, because at the time Manny Pacquiao won the IBO, it did not count as one of the main sanctioning bodies. Just like today, no one in boxing is considered a champion if they hold the IBO title. No one said Jaron Ennis is a world champion because he has the IBO title, or Max Hogan, or whoever. Canelo is the undisputed 168-pound champion, and he doesn't have the IBO title. Charlo doesn't have it. Devin Haney doesn't have it. Josh Taylor doesn't have it. I mean, nobody has it. At least that has it and is considered a world champion. So can someone logically explain how old media and HBO ran with Manny Pacquiao being an 8-division world champion, running with the fact that Pacquiao was a champion at 140 just because he had the IBO? And I repeat, Pacquiao had the IBO title, and the IBO title only, at 140 pounds. Since when in boxing history have we ever counted or considered the IBO as a world championship when it came to any fighter? That's obviously a rhetorical question because the answer is never. But you see how old media breaks and makes up rules just to falsely promote and make up history for the fighters on the hope list, which that raises the concern. If old media lied about that, what else they lied about Manny Pacquiao and other fighters on the hope list? These fighters that they continue to pump up on the pound for pound list, they're racially biased pound for pound list. For example, ESPN pound for pound list is not a list of the best fighters in the world. It's more so a list of old media favorite fighters. They got a fighter coming off a loss, Canelo, on the list. They got a fighter like Josh Taylor, who robbed his opponent recently, on the list. They have Lomachenko, who recently lost 2 fights ago in a stinking fashion, on the list over the undisputed champion, Devin Haney. They have a retired fighter on the list, such as Tyson Fury. They have a fighter that fought no one, not a single soul, in Inoue. I challenge anybody to name me 3 fighters that Inoue beat. And don't Google it. In fact, a fight ago, Inoue fought a guy, not on television, who was 12-2. A fighter that wasn't even ranked on the top 50 in his own division. That's the top of bums Inoue have been fighting, and old media ranks him so high. But until every fighter on the coincidental list directly points out these double standards, then the corruption will continue because old media gets to get away with it. Since old media figured, even though these fighters on the coincidental list fight for a living and they're the best in the world, they are afraid to speak the truth. The irony of it all. You have old media not afraid of being racially biased. Meanwhile, the fighters that fight for a living, the ones who's getting mistreated, they are afraid to speak the truth and praise whoever old media tells them to praise. But again, if old media lied about Manny Pacquiao being an 8-division world champion, what else they lied about on his record? Because like I said, the devil is in the details. If you pay attention to Manny Pacquiao, supposedly 7th division world title, because we're not going to count the title he won at 140, the IBO. That's ridiculous. But let's say the title he won at 150. He didn't even fight at 154. He fought at 150 pounds against Margarito, who came off a knockout loss to Sugar Shane Mosley. Then moved up some way, somehow. He fought Manny Pacquiao for a vacant title at 150 pounds for the title at 154. Does that make any sense? Pacquiao never fought at 154. Margarito wasn't ranked high at 154 because he just came off a loss at 147 back when Mosley put him to sleep after Margarito got caught cheating. But this cheater that just got knocked out, some way, somehow, him and Pacquiao end up fighting for a title at 154. Does that make any sense? Absolutely not. Just like when Canelo Alvarez fought for a world title at 19 or 20 years old against Ricky Hatton brother. Now keep in mind, Canelo at 154, he was ranked under the WBC at number 4. On the other hand, Ricky Hatton brother wasn't even ranked. You know why? Because he did not fight at 154. He never fought at 154. He was fighting at 147. Just to be clear, Ricky Hatton brother wasn't ranked at 147, nor he was ranked at 154. But some way, somehow, Canelo, who was ranked at number 4 at 154, he did not fight the fighter who was ranked number 1 or number 2 or number 3 under the WBC. Absolutely not. He ended up fighting a fighter who wasn't ranked at 147 nor at 154 for a vacant title at 154. Does that make any sense? And that's exactly what I'm talking about. They making up history for these fighters on the hope list. That's why Canelo after that never fought and beat a champion. A legit champion that won the title by beating a champion until he fought Cotto and Gennady Golovkin. I'm talking about like 5 years later. But prior to that, he already won like multiple belts, which that's my point exactly. In boxing, there's a corrupted system where the fighters on the hope list are allowed to duck and still rack up belts in order to make up history. See, back when Muhammad Ali was fighting, Muhammad Ali was the only champion. There was only one belt. He was the only undisputed champion. In addition to that, back in the golden era of the heavyweight division, Muhammad Ali successfully defended his undisputed title 19 times against the best of the best. And he beat the best of the best. Never dodged, never ducked anyone. In fact, he went after the best challenges and beat them. But then you have fighters like Shakur Stevenson, instead of paying homage, he ends up disrespecting the greatest in order to please old media that's still disrespecting him to this day. However, Shakur thought it was a good idea to disrespect the greatest who's no longer alive, who can't say nothing back. He thought it was a good idea to disrespect the man who put Shakur in a better position today. A man that wasn't afraid to speak the truth. More importantly, a fighter who proved that he's the GOAT by actually fighting, not talking. Just like Sugar Ray Robinson when he won 3 different titles in 3 different divisions. I'm talking about undisputed. Back when there was no division in between. So Sugar Ray Robinson won a title at 135, the undisputed title, moved up to 147, won the undisputed title there, then moved up to middleweight and won the undisputed title there, then moved up to light heavyweight and nearly won the title there. If he was living in this time, he would have definitely got the decision with the AC and all that, which if he would have pulled that off, if you count all of those divisions, that will be considered becoming undisputed in 7 different divisions. But then you have a fighter like Canelo who ducks every legit challenge to cherry pick all of these Europeans and still lose in the process. He wants to claim, I made up history. I beat more champions than Sugar Ray Robinson, Armstrong, Sugar Ray Leonard, so on and so forth. You all get the picture here. It's all about making up history. Nevertheless, let's get to Devin Haney's response to Floyd Mayweather. First of all, Floyd Mayweather said,
there's too many world champions in the sport of boxing. We had Rolly, who was the WBA champion. We had, at lightweight, we had Tank, that was the WBA champion. At lightweight, we had Devin Haney, was the WBC champion at lightweight. And then Camboso, who fought Devin Haney, had the WBC, the WBA, the WBO, and the IBF. Once again, there's too many champions at these different weight classes. And the reason why is because they said, well, why is there so many champions? Well, let me tell you guys what goes on in the sport of boxing that they're not telling you. Every time a fighter fight, he pays a sanction fee. A champion fight, he pays a sanction fee. If they got 3 champions or 4 champions, they get money from all 4 of those champions when they should only be collecting money from 1 champion. It's not a such thing as an interim champion. You got guys walking around carrying belts, and people think they're champions, and they're not really champions. They basically handing out belts. When I was fighting, you had to really earn it. What we're doing is we're watering the sport down. Everybody is champion now. We have to clean the sport of boxing up. There's too many champions at these weight classes.
That's when Devin Haney responded on Instagram by stating, quote, "It's only 1 champion in the lightweight division, Floyd Mayweather," end of the quote. And this goes back to the history lesson I just gave. Just like Manny Pacquiao, Gervonta is not a 3-division world champion. He's a 3-time world champion at 130 pounds. That's it, that's all. Nothing more, nothing less. But Tank is not a 3-division world champion. He's a single division world champion at 130 pounds. Tank never won a world title at 135 and 140. These are the facts. He only won interim titles, but he never capitalized on winning them interim titles because he never fought Lomachenko nor Josh Taylor. So hopefully now he ends up fighting Devin Haney. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Gervonta is a hell of a fighter. But if he is chasing legacy, then he has to catch up, because a guy like Devin Haney, who is 23 years old, he has already accomplished something that Tank haven't accomplished yet, which has become undisputed. Floyd Mayweather says something that all of these fighters from Shakur, Devin Haney, Gervonta, Jaron Ennis all need to pay attention to. Floyd, as Pretty Boy, went out there for an entire decade, proving himself time and time again in order to put himself in position to become Money May. I heard Shakur Stevenson say that he's already a superstar after he beat Oscar Valdez, and he will never take the short end of the money again. At least he said probably. Well, that's the farthest thing from reality. Unless you beat an Oscar De La Hoya, Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, a fighter on that level as far as popularity, then you cannot become a star, at least a superstar, overnight. Even if you do, you might not become a superstar. You have to have the it factor on top of the victory, like that. For example, Sugar Shane Mosley, when he beat Oscar De La Hoya, he didn't become a superstar. He didn't become a pay-per-view star like Floyd Mayweather, which is my point exactly. That's why Shakur has to look out for his career and make sacrifices by fighting the Navarrete and whoever is a champion to rack up his legacy until he gets that mega fight. On the other hand, Gervonta is not far from that. If he beats a Ryan Garcia, he's knocking on the door. But nobody is going to become a Floyd Mayweather just with popularity. You're going to have the popularity and the legacy. See, if Floyd Mayweather was in Gervonta's shoes, he would have smoked every single fighter that old media hyped up. Floyd Mayweather would have fought and smoked Vasyl Lomachenko back when ESPN was erasing his losses. Floyd Mayweather would have smoked Josh Taylor. Floyd Mayweather would have fought all of these guys until he got in the Ryan Garcia fight. And that's the Floyd Mayweather green print, and the only fighter that's following it to a T is Devin Haney. He's getting the popularity while stacking up his legacy at the same time. Then, hopefully after Devin Haney is done with Kambosos rematch and Gervonta gets the undisputed social media champion Ryan Garcia out of the way, hopefully that's when they could clash and we get a spark of Money May. Old media ultimate nightmare. This whole entire time they have tried their best to block another Floyd Mayweather from emerging. But it's too late, because somebody's going to do it. Devin Haney, Shakur, Gervonta, Jaron Ennis is too many great fighters in the sport of boxing. From the coincidental list, you can't stop the best breed in boxing. Last but not least, when Floyd Mayweather says there's too many belts in boxing, that's true. But there's only one champion in the lightweight division, which is no other than the undisputed champion Devin Haney, the first undisputed champion in the lightweight division in the 4 belts era, and the last undisputed champion since Pernell Whitaker. Devin Haney is undisputed, just like Canelo, Charlo, and Josh Taylor was. While Gervonta is the WBA regular champion, aka the interim champion, just like David Morrell is the WBA regular champion at 168 pounds today, while Canelo is the undisputed champion in that same division. Just like Errol Spence is the WBA champion, like Devin Haney at welterweight, while Sustanians has the same regular title, the interim title that Gervonta has at 147. Like I said, I already went in depth on this subject, which I'm going to leave the link for that video in the comment section below if you are confused. But really, there is no confusion. Gervonta Davis is the interim champion at the lightweight division, and the WBA need to clear their mess where they have 2 interim champions. Basically, they have an interim title and they have an interim belt for the interim title in order to milk the cow. In our reality, the WBA is pimping these fighters. Nevertheless, Tank is Devin Haney mandatory. So what that means, if Floyd Mayweather is sincere about cleaning up the mess and all of these extra belts, to me, interim titles are not a problem. The main titles are the problem. We need 1 face per division. The way I look at it, the interim titles, the silver titles, and whatever title under that, these are ranking titles. That's all it is in order to get to the champion. Again, the main problem is the actual titles where we have 4 titles per division, where it should be only 1 face per division. At the lightweight division, there's only 1 face right now, and that's Devin Haney. But if Tank won his shot and Floyd want to clean up all of this mess about the interim title, so on and so forth, then make the fight happen. Make the fight happen between the interim champion, Gervonta Tank Davis, the WBA interim champion, versus the undisputed champion, Devin Haney. That's how you solve that problem. It's simple and easy, by actually fighting, which is why we in the sport for, to see the best versus the best. We don't care about the WBA, the WBC. We don't care about none of that. We here to watch the fighters fight, the best fighters fight. That's why Undisputed wasn't that big of a deal a little way back, because, for example, when Floyd Mayweather was fighting, every time he moved up in weight, he went after the best fighters. Not the weakest champions. He went after the best champions. The fighters that old media was hyping up. That's why nobody cared about Floyd Mayweather fighting the weakest links, because he was already fighting the toughest links. So Undisputed was never that important. But in this era, where it's full of ducks from Canelo, Gennady Golovkin, Vasyl Lomachenko, Teofimo Lopez, now all you got to do is get a title. That way you put yourself in position to become undisputed, because now the trend is becoming undisputed, something that Crawford set in motion. This is something that backfired on old media, because ever since Usyk, Josh Taylor, Canelo became undisputed, they praised the heck out of it. But then when Devin Haney and Charlo become undisputed, they don't even put them on the pound-for-pound list. You see, old media tried to use undisputed as a way of making legacy. Once you do it, you don't have to fight nobody else, like Max Kellerman told Teofimo Lopez. You don't have to fight Devin Haney, Gervonta. You the man now. Just like they told Canelo. You don't have to fight Charlo, Andre, Benavidez. You the man now. Since Canelo found the weakest division to become undisputed. Right before that, he turned down undisputed against Andre and Charlo at 160 and 154 pounds. But then all of a sudden at 168, the weakest division, he chose to become undisputed after he timed to steal David Benavidez's belt like a thief. But it backfired, because you can run, but you can't hide. Just because you move up in weight, they're going to move up right behind you. And now all of the fighters on the coincidental list want to become undisputed too, because old media made undisputed the biggest achievement in boxing. At least when the fighters on the hope list became undisputed. But you have to keep the same energy when the fighters on the coincidental list do the same. You can't praise one group but not praise the other for accomplishing the same thing. However, that's what they've been doing in boxing for years, for decades, for a century. The fighters on the coincidental list, they have to do 3, 4, 10 times more to get the same credit a fighter on the hope list achieves. That's why you seen Bob come out and say undisputed is stupid. But it wasn't stupid when Josh Taylor and Lomachenko was aiming to do the same. He was supporting them mentally, physically, spiritually, and promotionally. Fast forward when Charlo, Devin Haney become undisputed. Now when Shakur is aiming to do the same, Bob tells Shakur and everyone else undisputed is stupid. Just to further prove the double standards in the sport of boxing. With the facts being laid out, drop your thoughts in the comment section below, subscribe below, and click on the notification bell to be continued on the next episode of Akhi, TV. Peace. And I'm on to the next one.